Have you ever sat in a restaurant, glanced at your bill, and wondered who decided that you should add a little extra? Why is leaving money on the table such a universal ritual, and yet one so strangely awkward? Tipping feels like second nature today, but its roots are tangled in history, class, and even manipulation. Because the truth is, tipping wasn't born out of kindness. It was born out of power. To uncover how this everyday gesture became a global social code, we have to rewind, not to America, but to medieval Europe. Imagine a nobleman visiting a friend's estate in 16th century England. After dinner, he slips a few coins to the servants, not because he has to, but to show that he's generous, that he's above them. This practice was called veils, from the French word veil, meaning to lower or humble oneself. But make no mistake, tipping wasn't humility. It was hierarchy in action. The rich tipped to demonstrate their wealth and status. It wasn't about rewarding good service. It was about reinforcing who had power and who didn't. Servants came to expect it, and refusing to tip became a social faux pas. In other words, tipping began as a way for the upper class to say, "I can afford to make you grateful." But where did the word tip itself come from? The most common theory, though debated, traces it to 18th century English coffee houses and taverns. At the counter, a box often bore the sign to ensure promptitude. Patrons dropped coins in before being served, hoping for quicker service. The acronym supposedly became TIP tip. While historians argue this story may be apocryphal, the idea it represents is real. Tipping is a transaction for better treatment. In these bustling coffee houses, tipping evolved from a gesture of class into a tool of convenience. You paid a little more, you got served faster. It wasn't generosity. It was strategy. When tipping crossed the Atlantic to America in the 19th century, it collided with an entirely different social reality. After the Civil War, tipping took on a darker meaning. Many newly freed African Americans found work in service positions as porters, waiters, and attendants. White employers, especially in the hospitality and railroad industries, saw tipping as an excuse to avoid paying real wages. Instead of being a bonus for good service, tipping became the only source of income for many black workers. The practice spread rapidly, especially after the Pullman Company hired thousands of black porters, paying them little to nothing, expecting them to live off passengers' tips. What had once been a symbol of class superiority in Europe became, in America, a tool of racial and economic exploitation. By the early 1900s, tipping was controversial. Many Americans despised it. Anti-tipping movements sprouted across the country. In 1904, the New York Times even published an editorial calling tipping un-American, arguing it created a servile class. States like Iowa and Tennessee went so far as to pass laws banning tipping altogether. For a brief moment in history, it looked like tipping might disappear forever. But it didn't. The power of social pressure and corporate greed kept it alive. Businesses realized tipping allowed them to keep wages low while making customers feel morally responsible for paying workers. The result? The burden of fair pay quietly shifted from employer to customer. By the mid-20th century, tipping had become institutionalized. In 1966, the U.S. introduced a tipped minimum wage, a separate, lower pay rate for workers who earn tips. Today, that federal rate is still just $2.13 per hour. The rest is expected to come from the kindness or guilt of strangers. In a way, tipping hasn't changed at all. It still relies on unequal power. But here's where it gets even stranger. Psychologists have spent decades studying why people tip, and the answers reveal how deeply human behavior is wired into the ritual. In the 1980s, Cornell professor Michael Lynn conducted extensive studies on tipping psychology. He found that people don't tip based solely on service quality. They tip based on emotion. Smiling, making eye contact, writing thank you on the bill. These small gestures often increase tips far more than actual performance. In one experiment, waitresses who touched customers lightly on the shoulder earned up to 20% more. That's right. Tipping isn't really a reward for service. It's a dance of social cues, gratitude, and sometimes guilt. We tip not because we have to, but because we feel like we should. In Japan, for example, tipping is seen as offensive, a suggestion that the worker isn't already doing their best. In most of Europe, Service charges are built into the bill, eliminating the moral confusion. But in North America, tipping remains a cultural performance, an invisible test of manners, empathy, and social awareness. Interestingly, economists call tipping a moral tax. It makes customers feel virtuous while allowing businesses to externalize costs. Studies show tipping also reinforces inequality, not just between workers and employers, but between customers themselves. Attractive servers, for instance, statistically receive higher tips than less conventionally attractive ones. Waiters who introduce themselves by name or squat to eye level when taking orders earn more too. In other words, tipping doesn't just reflect service, it reflects bias. And yet, despite its flaws, tipping endures because it satisfies something primal in human psychology. The act of handing over a few extra coins or dollars triggers a sense of agency, a belief that we are directly influencing our own experience. It gives us the illusion of control in an unpredictable social exchange. But the modern world is beginning to push back. With the rise of digital payments, automated kiosks, and delivery apps, tipping has exploded into every corner of life. Coffee shops, self-checkouts, even drive-through windows now prompt us with screens asking, "Would you like to add a tip?" The pressure is immediate, public, and algorithmic. Suddenly, generosity feels less like a choice and more like a demand. Sociologists call this tip fatigue, the creeping resentment from being constantly asked to subsidize wages through guilt. Ironically, this new digital tipping culture mirrors the very origins of tipping, a performance of status and obligation, mediated through technology instead of class. But maybe tipping's persistence also reveals something beautiful about us. Despite the greed and manipulation baked into its history, tipping reminds us that kindness, however small, can still connect people across a social divide. It's a fragile moment of human acknowledgement. I see your effort, and I appreciate it. Still, the big question remains. Will tipping survive the 21st century? Some restaurants have already banned it, introducing no-tipping policies that pay fair wages instead. In 2015, New York restaurateur Danny Meyer tried eliminating tipping altogether, calling it an outdated system that perpetuates inequality. But customers resisted. They missed the ritual, the subtle transaction of gratitude and control. Within a few years, many no-tipping experiments quietly ended. That's the paradox of tipping. It's a system most people dislike, yet few want to give up. It's both a symbol of appreciation and a symptom of injustice. In a strange way, the history of tipping mirrors the history of society itself, a constant tension between generosity and exploitation, between social equality and personal ego. What began as a noble's token of superiority evolved into an everyday moral balancing act, performed billions of times a day across restaurants, hotels, taxis, and delivery apps. So, the next time you leave a tip, or choose not to remember, you re-participating in a centuries-old ritual born out of power, shaped by psychology, and sustained by emotion. That little act of sliding coins across a table isn't just about service. It's about identity, status, and our uneasy relationship with fairness. Because in the end, tipping has never just been about money. It is about what it means to value someone's effort, and whether we truly believe appreciation should come at a price.